Now then, on the tree of life, which you see before you there, we have a diagram which perhaps is meaningless to some of you. I know to some of you it is very meaningful because I see many faces here who have gone through our lessons, taken the work which we send by correspondence, which incidentally is the basis for all else. Those of you who are here hoping to attain illumination in these 10 weeks and then call it a day will be disappointed. I'm telling you this right away. I have been criticized for this, but I like to call a card a card. You can't attain illumination in 10 weeks or in 6 easy lessons. We can plant seeds in you which will eventually sprout into illumination in this 10 weeks. If we accomplish this, I shall be most happy. But there are many of you here who will realize that if there's anything at all that's important in this world, if there's anything that's really important, it's this one thing, that if there is such a thing as illumination, if there is such a thing as attainment, if we are destined to develop higher consciousness, vaster consciousness, deeper, richer consciousness, if we really have a destiny in this universe that involves the eternal awareness of our own beingness, then surely nothing else counts. And if this is the way to attain it, then definitely we must put aside the very reasonable length of time that's necessary from our other activities in order to attain it. Those of us who are truly sincere aspirants, those of us who have developed this glorious divine discontent, will continue and will be willing to go through the disciplines. You will not receive anything for nothing. I tell you this immediately. You will have to work for it. You will not receive even one iota of real illumination, happiness, awareness without doing your part of the work. Those who try to get something for nothing usually become caught in the web of the confidence man. We get caught up in the various situations that exist in this world where we're taken advantage of to the point where we finally wake up, develop discrimination. Here in Builders of the Atom, I do want you to realize we're not out for quantity. We're out for quality. We have nothing to gain, nothing at all to gain except the joy and the satisfaction of bringing more centers of light to a greater awareness. The only thing we have to gain is to know that more personalities, more individualities are developing that ability which is essential in order to bring this particular planet and this particular world, this particular era, and the human beings upon it to that state which will assure them the ability to participate in the New Age type of energies. This is all we have to gain, and you see, this is not a personal gain. Those of us who are responsible for the work of BOTA have long since given up any ideas of material gain when it comes to spiritual work. We love all things material as being aspects of God, but no one in Builders of the Atom receives any kind of material remuneration for their own personal benefit. Please know this. That is why we can afford to say to you, we're not out for quantity, we're out for quality. Those of you who drop away will drop away for many reasons, and what we do is try to hasten it. That is, we try to help you to drop away if you're not ready for what we have to give, or if you don't happen to have the shall we say, affinity for this path of self-unfoldment. However, it is my personal belief that everyone in the Western world who is an aspirant has the affinity for this method of unfoldment if that person has developed enough drive, enough divine discontent. And this, perhaps, is the secret of the tremendous value of Kabbalah of the methods that are used in Builders of the Atom to help you to attain to the states of consciousness and the states of control, incidentally, the fulfillment, if you will, which definitely come to those who persevere. Now, the tree of life, the Kabbalah, is said to be the esoteric wisdom of Israel. Now, what does this mean? We know that the most extraordinary development that has taken place on this planet in the last 2,000 years is the fact that a certain tradition has remained so stable that even though from Judaism you had a split where you developed a Judaism and a Christianity, you still had this situation that the same holy books were utilized for spiritual development or for religious thought. Incidentally, this has nothing to do with the class, but there's a special glass that holds water that isn't here, and I'd appreciate it. My glass, which was in my office, I haven't seen it. I don't know where it was placed. There's a special lovely little glass that some beautiful, adorable, wonderful, and lovable member bought for the podium. I don't know just where it's been put. I saw it about a week ago. Anyway, the water is a very important thing for me when I am lecturing because I know most of you know this, but some of you may not. And those of you who know it certainly want to share this knowledge with the others. I become very dehydrated while I lecture, and for a very good reason. My lecturing is merely the bridge work. The reason this dehydration occurs is something that isn't very well understood by most people. It's because I have been very specially trained to project, you might almost say, actual essence from my own being. All the time I am talking. The speech is a vibrational bridge which is used by the higher powers that be in order to project to you the states of consciousness that it has been my privilege and joy to be able to accomplish due to long years, incidentally, of discipline. And I discovered long ago that a dehydration occurred. And, of course, this isn't very serious. All I do is drink more water. So I'd say I drink something like 2 gallons of water on the days that I lecture, especially afterwards, and also sipping during the lectures, or during any ceremonial or ritual work, or during any type of special meditational work. The rest of the time, I just drink a little bit more than most people, not very much more. But energy that's given out has to be replenished. And just as I mentioned to you before, we never get something for nothing. Even the price of projecting certain subtle energies really is involved in the need to receive more energy, but those who've been trained to do so assimilate the extra energy through water, since water is the mother of life on this planet, as I think you must understand. Now then, back to the tree of life. The tree of life is a diagram on the surface, but it is far more than this. The Kabbalistic tree of life is actually the framework for special meditational exercises, for, indeed, more than that, for special spiritual disciplines. It is the framework that has been able to preserve the ancient mystical teachings that were first received by the Jews and held in sacred trust by the Jews, and then gradually evolved into even larger expressions so that more and more people were able to utilize this, that is, people who were ready for the use of really high types and profound types of growth and unfoldment. Now, what do I mean by the diagram being used in this manner? Well, let's consider meditation. Most human beings say they have difficulty in meditating. Most human beings claim even that they don't know what meditation is. Many people who say I am in meditation, who think they meditate, incidentally, are usually lost in nothingness and aren't really meditating either. The truth is that very few people really know how to meditate. Some people are aware of it. Some people think they meditate, though they don't. And a very few, know what meditation actually happens to be. Now, meditation really happens to be something that only certain evolutionary levels accomplish. By evolutionary levels, I mean human centers who have achieved a certain degree of self-conscious awareness. Until we have achieved that, usually any attempts at meditation break down. Inevitably, they must. Now, let us go back in our consciousness to approximately 6,000 years ago. At approximately that time, it is said that a certain little tribe of people who lived somewhere in the Near East received very special teachings and instructions, which were based on their ability to accept a monotheistic idea and attitude towards the cosmos. Now, what do we mean by monotheistic? That is, they had evolved in some way, and which way I will explain to you through this series, incidentally, and it involves you, too. They had evolved in some way an ability or a capacity and a willingness to receive a very new idea which had not been known on this planet by the centers of life which we call humanity up to that time. They were willing to receive the idea that God is one, something that simple. Up until that time, there was a plurality involved. There was a God of thunder and a God of rain, a God of light. In other words, we had a sort of multiple type of worship that was pretty basic, or worship of material things. There were many kinds of worshiping, because man has a need to worship, and has always had this need to worship from the time he became man. But in this particular area, and by these few people, comparatively speaking, there was this willingness to receive a very new and original and extraordinary idea. God is one. And incidentally, the name of that God, mistranslated Jehovah, was called actually Tetragrammaton, or it was involved with the four holy letters Yod, He, Vav, He, which means that which was, that which is, and that which will be. In other words, there was no name given to it at all, not by the individuals who received the teaching. This teaching was basically what we see here, represented on the Tree of Life. It was called the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah, actually, if you break it down, means what? It comes from a root which means to be able to receive, to be able to receive. That is, becoming receptive to teachings that relate to reality or truth. This is the more rounded idea involved in the word Kabbalah, to be able to become receptive. All the teaching and training that BOTA gives you involves this one idea. For you to be able to train yourself, mind you, we will not really train you. We give you the material, but you have to train yourself. You can't get it without effort. Remember, we don't get anything for nothing, and effort is what we have to put out. Nevertheless, the ability to receive, the capacity to receive, is really involved with a certain evolutionary level of consciousness. This we will grant. Still, we feel that most human beings who are guided by the higher self to BOTA are ready to work on that particular level and principle. Now then, to receive has many ideas involved in it, of course. But remember, this is not involved with the idea of just receiving anything, like a lot of garbage from the more lowly or more immature types of personalities. This is being able to receive reality, truth, teachings that have to do with larger ideas. Now, the reception then, or the ability to receive, was apparently achieved to begin with in this area for the higher teachings to be brought to this planet, was received by a group of people who were called the Israelites, a very small group indeed at that time. And according to tradition, when asked who gave them this teaching, always the reply was the angels. Now, what was meant by the angels? This really meant beings who had a higher level of consciousness and evolution, and who were not anymore involved with the physical vehicles in their own consciousness on this particular planet. This is one of the ideas involved, because there are many meanings for angels, and angels, incidentally, has a lot to do with Kabbalah. There are all the terminologies you have been so accustomed to in the Western culture. Archangels, angels, principalities, fairies, elves, all those little creatures, all the ideas that involve the many aspects or expressions of divinity, you will find that these are all contained in the teachings on Kabbalah. Now, remember that at that time, when the Kabbalah is said to have been taught to a few enlightened people, now mind you, this wasn't taught to all these people, who we call the Israelites, to a few enlightened people who had come up out of the genetic strain of the Israelites. When this particular teaching was given, it was given under trust. In other words, it was given in a way which some of us call oral, or perhaps by direct perception, or by ability to achieve a lift of consciousness, so that there was a mutual interflow of conscious awareness between beings on a higher level and ourselves. This has to do with the hierarchy, of course. And I know that right here, for example, we have quite a number of you who have developed the ability to sense things that others cannot sense, just like some people can hear things within a smaller range than others, higher and lower tones. Some people can see things in a greater or a lesser distance. Of course, this has nothing to do with becoming farsighted when you pass 30. You know, I made it 30, as you remember. Became necessary. But the point is that we all have different ranges in our seeing vibratory areas, in our hearing vibratory areas, and in our tactile vibratory areas. Some of us, just with the tip of our fingers, can touch the skin, and we can become aware of all kinds of emanations or sensations that have to do with the person's emotional and mental state. Others just feel repelled without knowing why. Others think it's very nice. Others think it's more than nice. It all depends on your vibratory range and, of course, on the affinities. Still, it has to do with an ability to be aware of the tactile area of our sensation. In the same way, we have individuals who are able to reach into larger or expanded areas of consciousness, just like we have people who are more aware on the sensory areas. And of course, here is where we come into one of the basic teachings in Kabbalah, which is so different from the Eastern philosophies, and it is mainly this, that whereas the Eastern philosophies, having become aware through various meditational techniques, that the universe is based on mind, or that consciousness is that which has created the universe. Having come to that idea, they then proceed to try to get us to sort of leave all this nonsense behind, to evolve ourselves away from it, to turn our back on matter, on the physical universe, and to achieve nirvana, or the Buddhic state, and so on, which would be very fine if it were in harmony with reality. But you see, the one and true teaching, as far as I'm concerned, is mainly this: that the divinity or deity would never have gone to all the trouble it has gone to. Notice how I say it. I hope you're not insulted, because I'm going to show you both the masculine and feminine aspects of deity as we go along in this course, and try to help you to understand some of the polarities. So it'll take a special class after that, I think, where I will try to give you a true and complete as possible at this time understanding of the masculine and feminine principles, both in deity and therefore in ourselves. Nevertheless, the point is that in the area of Kabbalah, in the ability to develop or participate in evolution consciously, we have something very different from that which has been mostly promulgated in the Eastern philosophies, and it is mainly that it is our destiny and indeed our responsibility to bring deity to earth. In other words, every cell in your body, every atom, every molecule that makes up every cell, every atom that makes up every molecule, your whole consciousness, your thinking, your feeling, your living beingness must evolve to the point where it expresses deity, where deity contains you and you contain deity. In other words, God has to be brought to earth to express in and through these glorious, miraculous vehicles that we are, these astonishing, improbable personalities that we are. This is the Western Kabbalistic idea and has been basic in Kabbalah down through the ages. And it is not that Kabbalah has not seen that the universe has been created by consciousness. Kabbalah has seen this indeed, as I shall show you. In fact, I shall prove it to you. How do you like that? Isn't that a strong statement? I love strong statements when I can make them. But this I shall definitely show you, without any question. So you can see, we have some adventures ahead of us indeed. Now, if you sort of feel a bell ringing within your mind, within your heart, with this idea, you certainly are ready for us. But if you still want to escape to the Never Never Land, if you want your nirvanas, it's all right. You still need that. And we bless you and we love you, because sooner or later, every soul will be pressured by its own higher self, which is a spark of divinity, to bring whatever it finds to earth and bring about the redemption of earth. That's part of the biblical phraseology, you know. I'm going to give you a lot of that in this series, incidentally, to help you understand the Bible a little more thoroughly. Now then, remember, the whole Old Testament was given to us by the Jews. All right. Now I have heard, and my heart has wept, I have heard some of you say at times, all that murdering and pillaging and raping and so on. But isn't that in all literature? All humanity has this in its literature at various stages. I have heard some of you become enmeshed, and watched you in my inner vision, become enmeshed in the propagandas of separatism, in the hatreds that develop therefrom. And my heart has wept. Maybe it's foolish for me to let my heart weep. In fact, my higher soul thinks it's foolish. But you know, one of the wonderful things to me is that I have the freedom to let my heart be foolish where it feels deeply. And I think deity loves me perhaps a fraction more than it did the moment before I was so foolish, just like we do our children. Haven't you watched your pets and your children do foolish things, and hasn't your heart sort of melted with tenderness? Really melted with tenderness, just a little bit more because of it? You know, that's a sort of good thing. We can get deity to love us very much more if we keep this principle of mind, provided we also help ourselves grow up after we've had our pleasure in realizing this wonderful thing. It helps us to get over guilt complexes, incidentally, once we see this, and this is part of the work that we're all going to be doing together, help to wash some of the nonsense out of our hearts and souls. All right, then. We see how in Kabbalah, the basic teaching and training ideas that are involved have to do with discipline, with learning how to meditate, truly meditate, with learning how to understand who and what we are, with learning how to understand cosmology, both in its macrocosmic sense, that is, the infinite sense, or the universal sense, and its microscopic sense, that is, in the sense of the individuals, and to utilize this understanding, this awakening, to utilize these realizations, these perceptions, so that we can bring them down to earth and express them in and through the center of our being. Now, bear in mind that when we work with the Kabbalistic system, we are not working with something that is unknown or untried. Some people like to tell you that because a thing is old, it is marvelous. Well, there are some things that are old that aren't marvelous at all, and we're very happy that they've become extinct. And we'd fight like you know what if anybody tried to revive them. On the other hand, there are some things that are old that have stood the test of time and have grown as a result of this test. And Kabbalah is this. Because as the years went on, Kabbalah has become stronger and stronger as an influence on the evolution of humanity. Having been received by this group of people, and incidentally just by the few, that is the vanguard of evolution, remember, it then developed as a method gradually and evolved as all things must. Now, before we go on to the evolution of Kabbalah, I am going to take you with me on a very condensed journey that has to do with the Kabbalistic teaching of evolution, that is, cosmology, so that you can see how modern science has at last caught up with reality as taught by Kabbalah, although most of the individuals involved don't know it yet. But be sure they will. They will. All right. Together we're going on a journey right now. You, as a center of consciousness, are able to travel back to your very beginnings, if you ever had a beginning, and you did, incidentally, as far as the evolution of yourself as an individualized center of consciousness, you know. You did have a beginning there. You'd have to have had, wouldn't you? Though you never have had a beginning as far as being a part or aspect or spark or essence in the all or divinity, or you couldn't be here, could you? I wonder if you realize this. In other words, there's never a time that you haven't been in existence. If you think of existence before, this existence became personalized. Because if you hadn't been a part of divinity, you couldn't be anything now, since divinity is all there is. I hope you can follow that thinking, because this is Kabbalistic reasoning that I'm giving you right now, without getting you involved in Kabbalistic terminology. Those of you who are serious, those of you who realize that there's nothing on God's green earth that's important except following the methods that will bring you to your own attainment and awareness, will understand and will want to follow further or more deeply the elements that are involved. The rest of you, a seed has been planted. It will grow. It will grow. Now then, as I said, we're taking a journey, magnificent journey, a journey that is unthinkable, and yet because we are sparks of divinity, we can think it. A journey that's impossible, but because we are parts of deity, we're making it possible. Because you see, we are creative centers of divinity. And as creative centers, this means we have imagination. And this imagination of ours is fantastic. Here, we train you how to use it in harmony with reality and God to make your lives really worthwhile. This is what you learn here, but not overnight, and then you have to do it. All right, then, this glorious imagination of ours, let's travel with it. Back, 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 back. When did we begin? When did we begin? When we were born from our mother's womb? Could that have been your beginning? Then how were you grown? How were you grown? Could you suddenly have sprung up with an eye? Kabbalah says no. Kabbalah says if you've got an eye, capital I, you remember in the Bible, I am that I am? If you have an eye, it's because that I always was. Before Abraham, I was. That's Kabbalah. That is Kabbalah. Before Abraham, I am. And that is the name of the first sephira that you see there, that white circle, number 1, Kether. I am is one of its many names. Now, if you think many names, if they taught God as one, what is all this manyness about? Here is the extraordinary perception and spiritual genius of these people who were the vanguard, were able to receive these amazing spiritual revelations. The fact that they were able to perceive that one can be, that is, divinity can be the all, the one, and still be the many at the same time. Not by separation, as I have always liked to say. In a sense, you might say by division. Isn't that how cells multiply? Right here on Earth, as above, so below. But by division, not where it loses itself. You take a number 1 and you just put an imaginary line in the middle. You can say there are 2 parts to the 1. Then you can put imaginary lines between the 2 others, and you have them multiplying away like mad, just like cells do. Living cells, I mean. Yet still, this is the one. These are imaginary divisions. And remember what I said, we're taking an imaginary journey, and imagination is not unreality. This you will come to see more and more. Many of you know this. If you've imagined problems, haven't you had them? You remember Job, what I feared hath come upon me? Imagination is a vital force, is the creative force of divinity, and we're learning how to use it, of course. All right, then. If you are thinking properly, I hope you can see you couldn't have started when you were born out of your mother's womb, because you were already a tremendously complex organism. Go back. Did you start then when your father's spermatozoa, that is the one that was lucky and won, if it was lucky? Those of us who are unhappy think it wasn't so lucky, and those of us who are joyous think it was a lucky. It depends on our mood of the moment, doesn't it, as to how we're going to interpret it. At any rate, did you begin when your father's spermatozoa won the race and got to the ovum, fertilized the ova of your mother, and started a mad multiplication of cells that ended up in this extraordinary recapitulation of evolution that brought out a baby? Have you studied what happens to the embryo in its mother's womb? The single cell divided, and what makes them stay together? This is a question. Why do they stay together? To bring about a vehicle, which we call our bodies. We're going to have to go back some more then. And what would make this happen unless something were compressing it or holding it together into an organization? Can you imagine organization taking place without a mind? For instance, can somebody organize anything unless there's a mind organizing it? Certainly, can't you see that the organization of the growth of a vehicle in your mother's womb, do you see the fantastic complexity of this organization? Can't you see that a mind would have to direct it? Otherwise, how would it stay organized? Wouldn't it fall apart? An organization is what? Something run by a head with all the whole hierarchy coming down from that head. You may call it the president or the prolocutor general. Isn't it horrible? Terrible terminology, but I inherited it, darlings, so don't blame me. And at any rate, we can go on and keep expanding the idea. The president of a company, the mayor of a city. You have to have an organizing head and then a whole hierarchy going downwards. No matter what it is that you consider. You can't manufacture anything, you can't make anything without a thinking, organizing consciousness that's organizing it. So your two cells, your father's spermatozoa and your mother's ova. Now how could they have continued an organization that went on into such a fantastic line of evolution that exactly, incidentally, duplicates whatever our scientists have found about the organization of vehicles on this planet, except they skip certain groups in a way, or else science hasn't seen how to understand some of the apparent little jumps that take place, one or the other. At any rate, wherever you have organization, you must say a consciousness is organizing it. Therefore, your consciousness had to be organizing your vehicle. Well, what do you want to say? Your mother's consciousness was, but she wasn't. She was either happy or sorry. She was either bawling your father out or else praising him for his great abilities, depending on whether she wanted you or not at the moment. Still, deity saw to it. Deity saw to it that you were brought about whether your mother wanted you or not, because all of us are part of the whole infallible necessity of evolution, whatever the personal centers may think or want at the moment. We may have a certain degree of freedom of response, but there are certain parts of our being which are part of the whole and must act in accordance with the laws of the cosmos. So certainly your consciousness had to be involved in the growing of your vehicle. Your mother didn't do it. You'll say, oh, her subconsciousness did. I heard a few of you say that in your hearts. What do you mean her subconsciousness did? Do you think because you have a word you understand what it means? What does that mean? Her subconsciousness did. Quite a few of you immediately were trying to excuse it there in your thought processes. We make the mistake of thinking because we've named something that we understand it. What is subconsciousness? What do you mean her subconsciousness? Kabbalah says subconsciousness isn't hers or his. It's ours. Subconsciousness is the universal substance that has embedded within it the knowledge of its whole experience, and we all share in it. Just like every lagoon, though it looks like it's an isolated bit of water, has an undercurrent. It's fed by the ocean, and so it rises and falls with the tides, even though it looks isolated. So when you say my subconsciousness, you're making a mistake. You have a lagoon in which you have a certain amount of tremendous powers, and you can really have a lark. I mean, you can have a tremendous time with your imaginary creative abilities. By imaginary, I don't mean they're false. I mean creating in and through that divinity in you, which is able to imagine and therefore build and collect atoms around that image so that finally it manifests. I mean, you're all familiar with that idea, I hope. If not, you will be before we're through. So the point is, don't give me the excuse in your minds or hearts, that's subconsciousness, because we don't know what subconsciousness is until we've experienced it directly, and I have. Therefore, I know. There are certain areas in which I can speak very positively, and that's one of them. I know what cosmic subconsciousness is. I haven't experienced it once, I would hate to tell you how often. And I'm aware of the principles involved. That's why I know that none of our thoughts or emotions are private. Now, that may horrify you, but that rather delights me. I like the idea. Maybe I love humanity. You know, some people are foolish enough or lucky enough to have reached a perception where they can, and I do. I know one of my very dearly beloved fraternal brothers said to me once, "How come you let everybody sort of touch you and things like that? Don't you get too close to them? You know, the kind of thinking and feeling they do. I don't see that's bad. You take on some of their vibrations." And, of course, he had a point there, incidentally. On the other hand, there's another point also. Because I happen to know that whether I touched you with my physical hands or not, my aura extends due to my ability to experience the one, the indivisible. And I experience it more than most. Though there are some who experience it more than I do, I'm glad to say. I know, I don't think, it isn't a theory, I don't have to believe, I don't need any blind faith. I happen to know by direct experience that everything you think and feel affects me. Everything I think and feel affects you. I know this. And because I know it, I also know that your burdens are mine, your joys are mine. I also have a greater sense of responsibility towards you because of my knowledge. Because I know that if I hate, I know that if I feel separatism, I know that if I let the immature parts of my being run away with me, that I am hindering you. I am giving you a very powerful energy to react to. I know that when I spread my love, I'm sparking your ability and capacity to love your husbands, your wives, your sisters, your brothers, your children. I know to the degree that we learn to love each other, that we're expanding our capacity to love all else. This is the teaching of Kabbalah, basically. Although it takes a strong soul, I must admit, to withstand the awarenesses of some of the nonsense, the tantrums that the immature children of God can go in for. And we do not deny this. We do not deny it. And there are times when I'll spank. Incidentally, I've learned to spank pretty good, though it took me a while, where I see that a tantrum is making a child of mine, a spiritual child of mine, an aspect of God, run away with himself or herself. So you see, this hasn't to do with being sort of mushy. In Kabbalah, we face reality, and we keep bringing more of God into man. And the more we get into ourselves, the more we give to others, because we learn how. The stronger the soul, the more it withstands the immaturities, the more it learns to experience its selfhood, capital S, and helps others so to do. This is my responsibility. It's also my privilege. All right, now then, in this journey, I hope that you're starting to see that consciousness had to create anything that's organized. A typewriter can't create itself, nor can any machine. And certainly the organism of man is the most extraordinarily complex thing that exists. So we go back then what has been organizing it? Well, we're not going to go backwards in this way. I'm going to ask you to take a jump. Now, you're an aspect of divinity, so you can do it. Come with me now and jump all the way back, all the way back. Jump to what could have been or may have been the beginning, the very beginning of the universe. You say there was no beginning to the universe? There's always a beginning to organized physical substance. And there's always an end to organized physical substance. because organized physical substance is in a state of evolution. And so there has to be both a beginning and an end to that part. That doesn't mean there's a beginning and end to consciousness, though. Because if there's a beginning, what you have to say is this: consciousness had to begin it. Does somebody start building a house unless consciousness began it and finishes it? Can somebody build anything? So we go back. Now, some of you may say, why does she go on like that? I believe in God. That's not enough. It is not enough to believe. That's why we are so persistent in the things we have to teach you. You have to know. If you are believing, you're liable to believe any kind of nonsense. Suppose you believe some things that are true. Good. But you're also going to believe a lot of things that aren't true, if you're going to be satisfied with just believing. No. You have got to demonstrate it. If you can't demonstrate it, you don't know it's really so. Do you know? You'll say, well, I know, my heart tells me. Well, let me tell you, the heart told lots of people that unless they believed in a certain religion during a certain period, they were doomed. And so out of the heart telling them, their love, and I put the word love in quotes, made them put these people on the rack. And we have in history tears streaming down the faces of these so-called religious human beings because they loved the person's soul so much that they would destroy them to make them believe that unless they had a certain dogmatic idea, they were doomed. Do you think believing is enough? No. That's again the reason we say we're not out for quantity, we're out for quality here. Because we intend to guide you step by step through the lessons you receive in the detailed training and the work we do here to project to you the realities that it is my privilege to know. We intend for you to know by direct experience, to become masters of your own destiny, of your own mind and heart and soul, to become masters of your own environment, and by so doing to fulfill that which divinity has for you, and to bring about for humanity that which divinity intends. And you cannot do it if you just believe. You've got to know. And so we are guiding you step by step to have realizations and awakenings, and I project them. Some of you have them here at class. Some of you have them later. It takes some seeds, take a little longer than others to grow. But if you have the receptivity, Kabbalah is the reception. If you have the receptivity, the seed gets planted, and if you keep feeding it and nourishing it with the work and energies here, it will grow, and you will have, step by step, and not all at once, that which you are searching for, though you may all at once have a vision that shows you how worthwhile it is to continue going step by step. You may have a peek into what you're going to be and realize it as being a now, an eternal now. But that is another matter. At any rate, the universe had to have a beginning. And of course, our modern scientists have been finding this is so. Although we have many theories, whichever theories there are, whether the universe is a continuously created universe or whether it was all a condensed something and suddenly exploded, the point is that from a single type of atom called the hydrogen atom with a nucleus and one electron evolving about it, in the infinity of space, now come with me there right now in our journey, forget what you are at the moment. Drop your idea of personality and selfhood and become an observer and look at the infinity of space. Let your consciousness sweep above, below, right, left, forward, backward space. But it'll always curve upon itself. It will always curve upon itself because consciousness always returns to itself. That's why everything is a sphere, you know. Whatever you see or look, it's always related to your own seeing, isn't it? Therefore, whatever you look at no matter how far you stretch your consciousness, it will automatically make a circle and return to itself. In other words, it unfolds a space. And that enfolded space is the space in which you are evolving your center of consciousness, which is the center in deity, and directed by deity because you are that is a center in deity. So your consciousness will always return to itself, and this is what makes every central atom go in circles. This is what makes every atom collect together. Now there in outer space, our telescopes find what? We find that the single atoms have a tendency to collect together into whirling circles, and they go round and round. It's probably what makes us dizzy, you know. We haven't become accustomed to it yet. Maybe it takes time. At any rate, the going round and round of these atoms around each other has to do with what is called the power of gravitation. Now, in Kabbalah, this power of gravitation, again, is related to the idea of the central core or the oneness of deity, because everything has a tendency to try to collect into its compressed center. Because of what? Because God is love. Isn't love attraction? Gravitation is attraction. God is love. And where these atoms came from, incidentally, is something we won't bother with now, but I'm going to give you some exercises right here in class as we go on together to sort of try to give you an idea so that your consciousness will have something to chew on and meditate on to help you experience very extraordinary things in your own being. Nevertheless, think of this. Everything has a tendency to be attracted. Every body is attracted to every other body, B-O-D-Y. And in the same way, you might say, well, I sure hate so-and-so. That's beside the point. We're talking about the physical gravitations. The mental-emotional evolutions usually follow later in different ways. But the gravitation of simple structures, like a single atom together, makes what happen? We have nebulas when we look out into space. They're whirling spirals, which are doing what? Within themselves, they form smaller spirals, which do what? They keep compressing and compressing, like sardines. They press and press into each other until finally they sort of have a conflagration and you have a sun born. Then they keep compressing and compressing. And what happens? These single atoms become more and more complex, so that from a simple something you have something more complex happening. Now let's come to our solar system. In our solar system we have the very simple body, and I repeat, the simple body of the sun. Now our sun and every sun in the universe is far more simple because it only has a certain amount of elements that have been born by compression, incidentally. Our sun is far more simple than is, for instance, our planet Earth or any other planet. It is far more simple. And here we come to one of the ideas that is very basically involved in Kabbalah, that evolution is actually God. Evolution is actually life. We cannot say when did evolution begin or when did life begin. What happens is that God or life or the one starts concentrating a center within itself. Now mind you, listen to this carefully. It isn't a center. It isn't a center. It concentrates a center, like you can concentrate on a center of something. It concentrates a center within the everythingness in order to organize itself into more consciousness. Look at this planet for a moment. Look at evolution. On this planet, we have elements that go from the number 1, which is the hydrogen atom, having one electron whirling around it, with one core at the center, to elements that go up to 100 and something, which means 100 and something electrons whirling around the core with 100 and something of the positive charge in the middle, plus a few little extra goodies that they throw in as they get more complex. But the point is, on this planet you have an extraordinary number of more elements than you have in the sun or in any sun, actually. And you have this because the planet is a more complex type of form. Now, on this planet, you have another thing then that develops. On this planet, you have these various elements start gathering together. They fall in love with each other. They start immersing themselves in each other under very extraordinary conditions, and they start becoming what? On this planet, they start developing themselves from atoms, which are called, when a group of them are together, called elements. They start developing themselves into compounds. In other words, like an atom of one thing will join with an atom of another thing, and then it'll become something new entirely. I've often loved bringing out the idea of salt. Now, we can't live without salt, but it takes two atoms that are poisons in themselves when they're gathered together as elements to make salt. But once they gather together, once they get married, once they fall in love and become a new being, that is, they start cooperating with each other. How? By becoming a more complex organization. You have a new birth. You have salt. In the same way, you have all these different compounds that are evolved right here on Earth because of the Earth itself having more complex or organized elements. Then out of that, an amazing thing occurs, according to evolution with science. And Kabbalah has always taught this. This is the point. They say we've only recently learned things. No. Kabbalah has always known that from the simple, you evolve into the complex. They start with number 1 and they go around to 10. But remember, they also keep increasing their numbers in other ways, which I will show you, because they say God creates through geometry, through number, and this is exactly what science has found. You add more and more numbers to your atoms. You add more and more numbers by compression, incidentally. In other words, colonies come together and they start cooperating. So that when you have a whole bunch of compounds that have come together and started to cooperate, then you have something that evolves, it's able to express the organization, which brings a more advanced state of beingness. Now, God has not been absent from the single atom. God has not been absent from the element, nor have you, incidentally. This is your evolution we're talking about, not something away from you. God, or you, that center which you call I am, has not been absent from the compression of these various elements into compounds, from the compression and organization and association of these compounds, the cooperation of these compounds with each other, to become what? Molecules. From the compression and development and organization of these molecules, which finally develops a cell. And your body is made up, your physical body is made up out of trillions of cells, which are made up out of the molecules and the compounds. You are the atoms that were flung into space before the beginning of time. You are that. Your body, whatever complexity it has evolved on the physical plane, your body is made out of the stars, out of the infinite universe. Your body right now holds atoms that were perhaps created billions of years ago. If you want to go and look at it through a telescope and have some great astronomers show you some distant galaxy, your body could have atoms from a galaxy that doesn't exist anymore. Because we look out into space through a telescope and we see what isn't there. We see into 6, 7, 8, 10 billion years ago, and perhaps more. So we look out and see into 10 billion years ago. Do you realize the vastness of this? If your consciousness can see into 10 billions of years ago by looking at a picture of 10 billion years ago, and we don't know what's there now, it certainly isn't there anymore, because it took the light 10 billion years to get to what the camera collected. That's why it was 10 billion years ago. So you see what happens to the past? Now this is what Kabbalah has always said, that we are coexistent with everything that has ever been before time began, and that's you. whatever atoms you have in what you call your physical body are collected around you. Why? Because you have evolved a consciousness that has been able to go to collect from the whole universe, incidentally, and from the sun and from this planet, more and more organized forms. In other words, you have more and more become a center of consciousness, which means what? You have been in the process of evolving an I know that I am and I am, and we cannot tell you how long in physical terms. And yet you have always been I am, but you did not know you were, just like you didn't know it when you were first born, because we recapitulate these things. Now, Kabbalah has stated at all times that all things start from the primordial point, from the simple, and by love and compression, that's why they call the number one the beginning of the whirling, the point within the circle. Isn't that interesting? Kabbalah knew this, because naturally higher levels of consciousness knew this. And they taught it to the Israelites because a few people had evolved in that particular group who were able to accept that tremendous idea that God is one and that everything that exists is an evolving center of that one. Now why, one would ask, would God have had to take from the simple and start bringing it into more and more compression to bring more and more organization? Do you realize the organization involved in your body? Do you know why the human vehicle is the most highly evolved consciousness? Because it's the most complex. You go up the line and you find the more organized and complex the body, the more degree of consciousness, of imagination, of personality, of will, and of ability to affect and change the environment is involved. And when we come finally to the human vehicle, what have we got? We have something that is fantastic and utterly improbable, as our scientists say. We have something that has become aware of itself. It has turned its consciousness around, just like the universe is said to be curved, just like I said, all light travels in curves. Everything develops into a sphere because of these curves. We have developed the ability to curve our center of consciousness around to ourselves and start saying, I am I. In other words, we have achieved the first major and primary step of evolution. We have become something that makes it inevitable that as long as we continue in the way we're going, we are going to become God-men. God-men, which incidentally in Kabbalah and in the Bible is said to be higher than the angels. Men-gods, no. God-men, yes. This is what we are after. Now, the reason we have been able to start turning our consciousness around is what? Because we achieved a complexity of vehicle with a kind of brain, finally, and incidentally, we grew it. Step by step by step, we grew it. Some people who look at evolution say, well, if God has been growing these parts of us, our bodies and so on, why did God make so many mistakes? Look at the dinosaur period. What do we mean? How do we know God made mistakes? God is life. How do we know, as God is life, how do we know that during that period, while God was fixing conditions for the next step, it wasn't God's great pleasure to prance around in the dinosaur level of self-being? Think of it this way. Once we have achieved the complete consciousness of who and what we are, and this I am going to help you do in every way I can, if you are willing to do your part, we realize this, that we are not what we are at this moment. We are everything we've ever been. Now, whatever we were, say, 1,000,000 years ago, 1,000,000,000 years ago, a few thousand years ago, incidentally, according to Kabbalah, we keep reincarnating on this planet, then on other planets, then in the sun, back and forth, and finally in other suns. We are a continuously evolving being, a center of consciousness, in, for, and with deity. But the point is, how do we know there's been a mistake? Wouldn't it be better to say that deity, in building special conditions, also gets in there and enjoys it? Kabbalah says that life and more life is what deity is after in and through us. Therefore, be hungry. Don't follow. I repeat, do not follow the teachings that tell you to kill desire, to give up wanting anything. This is the opposite of what true perception and experience can tell you. I ought to know. I followed the Eastern teachings once. I know. It is not correct. I know. I've gone further. I've gone beyond their nirvana. I promise you, my darlings, I've gone beyond it, and I would not lead you astray. My love is too complete to remotely let me do this. You can develop more and more hunger for life, which can be fulfilling. And yet, you can also recognize that every bit of hunger is something to want, even if it isn't fulfilled yet, because that means you're alive. Aren't you dead when you stop hungering? What do you mean? You who've read so many books, quoting and prattling, some of you, alas, you precious ones, about what we've got to do is kill out desire and give up wanting physical things and so on. Of course we want to give up being materialistically oriented. He who thinks that fulfillment is in getting things is indeed buried in nonsense. But life will teach that person. Still, if that person is hungry for things, that person is better off, because they'll reap the repercussions of getting what they want and having it turn to dust in their mouth and ashes on their tongue. And they'll keep growing. They're better off than the person who says, I will give up desire, I will return or find or try to achieve nirvana. God is life. God is evolution. You are life. You are evolution. You are the vanguard of evolution. This is what Kabbalah says. As the vanguard of evolution, you have a responsibility to your own center of selfhood. You have struggled and torn. You have been tormented, and you have wept, and you've laughed, and you've pushed, and you've compressed to make yourselves the extraordinarily unique and glorious personalities that you are today. Oh, you think you haven't got a glorious personality? Nonsense. I'm going to thank you. We're all unique. No one but you can let divinity share with you the way you think, feel, behave, know, grow. You are unique. You are a color in the universe that has never been duplicated and cannot be, because you are your own group of beingness, of your own line of evolving, expanding consciousness. So remember, Kabbalah says that God is life. God, life, incidentally, is associated with number 2. We'll go into that through the rest of this series. God is organization. God is evolution. That's associated with number 3. After number 2 works on number 3. That's the number 2, the father, the masculine principle, goes to work on the number 3, the feminine principle. And I don't know, the boys have been blaming the girls, saying Eve tempted Adam into all this naughtiness and nonsense. According to Kabbalah, it's the impact of the masculine principle that started the feminine principle into organizing all this evolution. So I don't know, maybe we'll have a word or two to say to you wonderful masculine representatives, so that we can all sort of take not the blame, but congratulate each other joyously and saying, my God, I am glad that God had this brilliant idea of evolving centers of deity that are you and me. Incidentally, that's what we're after. Wouldn't you enjoy that? Instead of the way you feel or think? And you can feel this way, and you can. I promise you can, if you're ready and willing to work on it. All right, then. God is evolution. Evolution is not something separate from God. Not that that is all that God is. For example, I am whatever I am. Some people may want to call me naughty names. I hope not. but they might want to, especially if they don't like some of my ideas, and some will call me very sweet names, and that I like, naturally, because we're each the center of the universe that we are experiencing for deity, as well as ourselves as part of deity. But the point is, I am I, and each of you are the same extraordinarily unique and glorious thing. However, the fact that I am I doesn't keep me from expressing many aspects of I, does it? Now, I express many ways of beingness. Now, when I was something like, I shouldn't tell you, you may hold it against me, but when I was something like 13 years old, I went into, one of those adolescent sprees and played hooky for just a little while from school and went out feeling quite grown up and got a job in a candy packing place. And I really packed candy very well. I'm proud of myself. I packed it into me far more than I packed it into any box. And I've always been proud of my accomplishments. We've got to learn how to appreciate proper things, you know. Of course, the employer didn't agree with me, and I only lasted 4 days. But, I did a lot of packing in those 4 days. I don't know how much weight I may have gained or not. Distance has sort of made that part of it fade from my memory. The point is that is what I did at that age. All right. Now, when I was 16, I did other things. I won't tell you. When I was 18 and 19, I did other things. And so on, down the line. Now, but today I am I. Now, the things I did at those different ages, aren't they the things that have given me my richness of today's being? Now, the things you did, no matter what age you were, aren't they the things that have given you your richness? This is evolution. To look back on yesterday and last year and not moan and groan. This is what Kabbalah says. But to look on all the past as the inevitable necessity for that age. And to realize that every experience is what your selfhood uses to digest into itself and to expand its consciousness. The universe is expanding. That's because, you know why? Your consciousness is expanding. Our scientists say the universe is running down in its entropy, and someday will be a thoroughly dead thing. But remember, you don't get something for nothing. But the point is, as the energy of the so-called physical universe is running down, you know what's running up? Consciousness. We're using it. We're eating it. We are eating it. We are assimilating it. We are expanding our beingness through it. We have a completely erroneous idea if we want to get away from anything. What we want to do is walk with the ecstasy of I am I, because I am the vanguard. I have had the stick-to-itiveness. I have had the ability. I've had the amazing, miraculous good luck, if you want to call it that, though it isn't really just that. I have had the extraordinary beauty of the love of God to such an extent that from an unconscious center of all, I have been able, because I am a spark of consciousness of that all, to start deepening my cup of being by going through all types of experience, pushing my way up the ladder. And the point is this: if our consciousness first had to go through knowing what it feels like to be a lizard or a fish or a snake or a worm, of course some people think I still am, or an ape. Some people think, some people look like that, especially if they're mad at them. But if my consciousness has gone through those areas, learning how to organize more and more complex vehicles in and through which to evolve more experiences. Is it any different than the fact that when I was 13 years old, I was able to pack so much candy into myself as well as a box? Isn't that just part of the experience of yesterday that has enriched and grown us? Therefore, God has to be seen as the core of our beingness. And yet we have to see ourselves as being the core of God's beingness. Deity apparently has such a nature that it must keep expanding its selfhood through developing individualized personalities for richer and richer beingness and awareness. And incidentally, on this planet, that's us. I think that should be a good beginning. We're going to be giving you a lot of important exercises to try to help you experience this while we project certain awarenesses to you, at least so that you can get the seeds. Some of you will have quite a few experiences through this whole course that we'll have, or this class that we'll have in this condensed period. But the thing I've tried to show you basically as a beginning is this, that according to Kabbalah, and we have a truth here that is fantastic. I'll give you some more of the evolutionary history as we go along with the class. Deity definitely and always has been in charge of the evolution of life, because life is deity, even though life is not only, that is, deity isn't only life. Deity is something more, but just like I am now something more than I was when I was 13, and at age 13 I had all the potential that was going to grow me into today. Maybe some of you thought I should have given up at that time. I hope not. Nevertheless, whatever potential I had at 13, that was part of what I had to go through to become my today, didn't I? All right, as a center of experience, a line of self-discovery, a line of discovering myself, where my consciousness could finally turn in and be able to look at me and say, I am I. If this seems vague to you, we will make it more concrete and clear as we go along. We have an ability to do this. Many of you already know, I realize. So just for this week, I want you to try to bear in mind this basic idea, because it's a vital beginning and necessary before anything else can really develop. And that is that deity in itself is something we cannot hope to comprehend from this level of awareness. But it is possible to develop in such a way to achieve a certain center of awareness so that we can experience deity directly and know by becoming it. You don't know what a dog or cat feels like unless you can become a dog or cat. And certainly I have, more times than once. You don't know what anything feels like unless you become these things. All you can do is guess by its behavior. Now, you can know certain aspects of deity, but before you can know them, you have to start working in special ways, transmuting what your old thinking, feeling patterns. And there are other elements involved which we will go into, and we're going to help you with these very extraordinary exercises which I have been given for all of us to work with together here. We're going to have a very short intermission in just a moment. I'm going to ask our beloved hostess, Anne Ryan, to come up and give you some announcements as I go out. Then you will get up and stretch, get your blood circulating. Those of you who love the filthy weed, that's all right. We don't say you shouldn't. You can go out and enjoy it out of doors. Be sure you put it out. And otherwise, just sort of stretch, get yourself awake, and then after about 5 minutes, we'll return together. We'll have some questions and answers. We'll have a special meditation, and then we'll proceed with the classwork next week. We will sort of, in some ways, deliberately wait for those of you who need to be weeded out to weed yourselves out, or those of you who just aren't able to participate at this time for other reasons, to sort of step back so we can develop a coherent vehicle, because the vital energies we work with, we like to make sure that we have as few disruptive factors in the mind and emotions as possible, because we are working with very intense energies, and it's much easier for us when those who are just curious finally drop away. We've had very good luck with using this method for many years now.